Welcome to the Arete Podcast, the podcast created to help senior executives and the organisations they lead live up to their full potential. Join us for cutting-edge interviews with leading senior executive and board members across all industry sectors, and for practical tips to accelerate your executive career. And now, here's your host, Richard Triggs.
Well, Damien, welcome to the podcast. I know that we've been talking about this for a little while, and it's great to finally have the opportunity to have a chat to you. And as you said just prior to us hitting record, we've both just returned from a couple of weeks in Italy.
Yeah.
How was your holiday?
Amazing. Thanks, Richard. I felt really kind of naughty in a way because often I go away in December, January, but going away in September was awesome.
Yeah.
And we shared some time. Coincidentally, we obviously didn't run into each other, but we were in Rome around the same time, no doubt. I loved it. And it was good. Plays havoc as your body. We discussed that, but it was a lot of fun and great to get away at this time of year.
And wasn't the weather spectacular?
Amazing.
I think it rained once in the 2 weeks that I was there, and the rest of the time it was just absolutely beautiful.
And quite warm, huh? Quite warm.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that I found really amazing, particularly doing something like going through the Colosseum, is realizing, that this building's thousands of years old. And whilst, in Australia we have the Indigenous history and so on, there's anything like that from a Western construction art kind of perspective. I mean, seeing a statue that was carved more than 2,000 years ago, and it's still immaculate.
Yeah.
Just blew my brain.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I was struck by the same thing, Richard, the engineering feat and the ambition of the Roman Empire, and what they constructed and their baths and their hygiene. It's a remarkable place. And I mean, we went to Milan at the end of the trip, and Milan just built over all these old Roman ruins. So if you go underground, like when they dig out train stations, they find it. But it's great to see that Rome is actually preserved quite a bit. The Colosseum, a lot of the older ruins are still there, which is fantastic because in modern cities often, they don't look at it hundreds of years ago with the same, lens that we look at it now.
Yeah, well, I sort of laugh and I think, imagine, 2,000 years from now, if the people are coming to Australia and, all of the buildings here, won't be around. But even if they were, they'd be going, okay, so how do we assess civilization? Oh, let's look at a Westfield Indooroopilly, and it doesn't quite have the same gravitas as something like the Colosseum or, the Vatican, that's for sure.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely, Richard. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Well, anyway, let's get into it. So, Damien, I know that you're also a podcast host, but tell us, about what you're up to professionally.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Well, listen, I'm a lawyer by trade, so to speak, and I've been a managing partner in a former life. And about a year and a bit ago, I took the leap out of the comfort of big law, and I've do conflict work. So I do mediation work in which I resolve disputes, litigation, workplace disputes. And I also do coaching and leadership consulting. So I guess a common thread in my work, in a sense, is conflict, because a lot of the coaching work I do is helping people manage relationships and perspectives. So in a sense, that's a common thread. But yes, I'm drawing on some of my legal skills because I'm retained as a lawyer in mediations, but in a sense, it's a much broader skill set than what I did traditionally, and I'm really enjoying the challenge. It's been great.
Right. Well, let's come back to that in a bit more detail, but let's start where it started. So talk us, through your career history and what led you to being where you are now.
Well, I studied no family in the law, but I studied law because I'm a student of humanities and liked politics and history and the like. And so I started actually in criminal law in a small West End firm. And then I started a firm with a co-founder, another partner, in 2007, which was a boutique insurance workplace health and safety firm. And we actually grew that firm. We started with 4 people. We were mad enough to start at that stage and grew it to 50 people in about 10 years. And that firm was the firm that eventually merged with DWF, which was a global legal provider. So that was a good story. And I wasn't the first managing partner of DWF, but I was the second. So I managed the Australian arm of DWF, the global business, the Australian arm, for a couple of years before I moved into my current role. So that's in short compass. So it sort of goes from training in big law, if I can call it that, worked at Cause and Blake, Dawson, Waldron, now Ashurst and Sparks, sort of to starting my own firm with a co-founder in 2007, growing that, and then finding myself in a global law firm. So I've sort of had an interesting background in that I've worked in both kind of national firms, startup land, and also global firms at the end. And now I'm back in a startup space. So life has a wonderful cyclical way about it, huh?
So you mentioned that you didn't have any of your family in the law. It's interesting that I remember meeting a girl out one night, and she said to me, "Oh, do you work in the law?" And I had never heard that expression before, because nobody says, "Oh, do you work in the recruitment, or do you work in the accounting?" So I wonder why, what's particularly unique that people say, "Do you work in the law?"
Yeah, maybe it just gives it a bit more status and gravitas, does I don't know. It's a very common expression. You're quite right. You don't say you work in the recruitment. You work in recruiting.
That's right. Yeah, I know. But so, what drew you to a legal career, given that you didn't have a family background in that area?
As I said, Richard, it was a case of me loving humanities and studying an arts degree with a law degree. But what it really also fascinated me, and still fascinates me actually, so all that stuff that's important about the rule of law and the importance of it in a democratic system and the importance of a system that holds and all those sort of issues, but also the humanity of it really fascinated me from the outset. The fact that it's run by humans, it's imperfect, that there's uncertainty in it. I remember, and when I give my speech to plaintiffs, individuals in legal processes and mediations, I talk a lot about that. I talk about the vagaries of the legal system, the uncertainty, the fact that a person in the civil case has to make a finding based on their assessment of you and your evidence. And that's a very personal, value-based thing within the parameters of legal principle. And so I've always been really fascinated by the human side of it. I remember as a criminal lawyer back in the day, when we got a law list and when I was doing legal aid defense work, you could see from the judge you picked whether your client, was likely to go inside potentially and serve a custodial sentence or not based on the judge, because you got to know their preferences, so to speak. So I've always been really fascinated by the system in broad compass, but also the absolute humanity of it, and the imperfection of it.
It's interesting because lawyers are often accused of lacking humanity, and yet that was the main driver for you to get into the law.
Yeah, it's very true, actually. And that's probably why I find myself in this current role. I'm really fascinated by what makes people think and how people make decisions and why, and how they manage risk and all those sort of issues which feed into my mediation practice. So you're right, it's a bit, I probably in a sense am not the usual black letter lawyer.
Mm-hmm. And I'm always interested when somebody is in a profession, whether it be law or engineering or accounting and so on, and then making that step into leadership. Certainly I imagine that when you were originally being offered or in discussion about stepping into that role of managing director, if you looked at your own skill set at the time, how proactive were you in terms of identifying where the gaps were and what you felt that you needed to develop from a competency point of view in order to really succeed in that role?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I don't think we do enough analysis of that. So I'd been a partner managing a team for some time, but it's a totally different game managing a whole organization and a firm. And I felt that probably what I really needed to explore, which was a story of my transition more broadly, is I was kind of late to the party in a way. It's interesting that I'm in the leadership space because I was late to the party of realizing that it's a very different skill set being a leader compared with being a technician. And so by the time I became managing partner, I'd really thought seriously about that and was very curious about it. I'd read a lot about leadership. I'd explored a lot of broader dynamics. I'd had uncomfortable conversations. There'd been friends that, that had left the business that were really difficult. So there were lots of sort of lessons that I took on board. So I felt at the time reasonably well equipped to take that role. But perversely, the opposite is true. When I first became a partner at about the age of 36, I was probably quite ill-equipped. I was a reasonably good technical lawyer, but I still hadn't grappled with the reality of what it's like to lead people and bring people with you. So in a sense, I was kind of late to that party, but a lot of the time I spent in my 40s was really exploring those dynamics and trying to get better at it, and just really being curious about it.
And so what sort of resources did you utilize at the time? I mean, obviously now you're working in leadership coaching, but, at that point in your career, were you working with coaches or going back and doing, further formal study, or what did you do?
Lots of informal study, and lots of reading more broadly. I've always been a lifelong learner. In a sense, lots of mentoring. I didn't have. It's interesting. I look back and I realize now that I would have really benefited from coaching, perversely, and I don't think we're in the law very good. This is interestingly why I'm in this space, at understanding lawyers that tend to be probably more inclined to think they've got this under control and less inclined to think they need help. And that's very much the professional skill set, because you're there to solve other people's problems. So I sought a lot of mentors, and I sought a lot of people in broader business, perversely. I did have mentors in the law, but I really sought out and took advice and broad soundings from people in broader leadership roles, even in engineering, in health, so I really sought out and surrounded myself with other leaders in an informal and formal settings to just kind of pick their brains more broadly. So that was really my approach to the leadership space. And I think that I'm now, actually, for what it's worth, doing a course to become accredited as a formal coach, which it's a very unregulated field, actually, Richard. It's really interesting, to be frank. It's really fascinating but I've decided that I will go down that path. And a lot of the resources that they turn to that I'm now in the process of doing this education course, books that or resources that I'm broadly familiar with. So I feel reasonably well equipped to take it on. But yeah, it really is a question, I think, of having that passion and curiosity for what drives and motivates people early in your career journey, because it's just a totally different world being a technician compared with being a leader. They're actually quite separate skill sets.
Oh, absolutely. And certainly, from my experience in terms of my own business and career, as well as recruiting senior leaders for organizations, often when somebody is very competent on the tools, they step into that role of leadership, but they're too busy, going to their comfort zone of being on the tools to actually, lead effectively. And in many respects, it is easier to have somebody in a leadership role who doesn't have the ability to be on the tools, because they then don't have that excuse, do they?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I've thought a lot about it. So at first, there's that credibility of that, to use a cricket analogy, you're a good batsman in the team, and often they're the captains, or good bowlers. So you have the credibility of people, but you're quite right. I think people seek it as the comfort zone. They stay in that comfort zone. They're mistaken in the view that the clients pay the bills, so that's where they need to be. But really, where they need to be is in the big strategic picture and the leadership people picture. So you're quite right. And I think law firms have grappled with that dilemma for some time. Like, for example, putting in place, COOs outside of law, or CEOs inside of law, in large law, outside of law, because they understand that it is quite separate. So there is the credibility equation of leadership and understanding where people come from. But I think it can definitely hold you back in terms of you just go back to your comfort zone. And we all have a tendency to want to be in our comfort zones, despite it's a human tendency, isn't it? So
Absolutely.
That definitely plays out.
Yeah. And so what would you say were, some of your key learnings, and perhaps in hindsight, what were some of the things that if you had your time over again, you would have done differently to get a better result?
Yeah, lots of things come to mind. I mean, for a start, when I was in the scale-up phase, I made the mistake of hiring friends and I lost a friendship or two, and that's really taxing because but you must realize in a startup business that your business is like a child. The best interests of the business always prevail. And so that was difficult. I think I made the mistake in the early stage of my career of mistaking confidence for competence. So I was, and more men do that than women, I think, tend to have a tendency to do that. So sometimes I felt like I didn't do as much due diligence. Interesting, speaking to a recruiter, getting the recruitment piece right, making sure that we really got the right people on the bus in the right places. So that was another key lesson. The other key lesson was the importance of being as honest as you can be with people and also authentic as you can be. And I use that term deliberately, honest about what's going on. I think that really builds trust and rapport with people. And another key lesson is don't pretend to be all things to all people. When you don't know something, say it, get other good people around you. And you certainly don't want to be indecisive or be paralyzed by indecision. But another key lesson is things aren't as urgent as people often say they are. So think about things and be thoughtful. Even in a fast-moving environment, I think we can lose sight of that. And of course, the other key learning is, more broadly, is don't shirk the hard conversations, which, interestingly enough, lawyers are particularly good at shirking them. We're very good at postured conflict, or email conflict or conflict in a process, but to actually lean into difficult emotional conversations with people is not naturally in a lawyer's wheelhouse, so to speak. Right. So that can be quite tough.
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of great learning there. I mean, certainly in terms of myself, I way back in my late 20s or around that age, I employed a good friend into a role and I needed to fire that person from that role. And it was very, very tough. And I made a decision then, more than probably 25 years ago, I will never, ever employ a friend ever again. And I think that it's fraught with danger employing friends and family because it's very hard to distance the relationship from the key deliverables, the expectations of the person in the role. And secondly, I remember reading a book many years ago called Fierce Conversations. And you're absolutely right. The ability to have a fierce conversation that's, grounded in empathy, but also reality. I mean, I don't think it's limited to lawyers being challenged by doing that. I think that is, very much a human tendency, and it is very detrimental to, being able to lead well if you can't do that appropriately, for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a conflict endemic in. I mean, sometimes in my facilitation work, I ask people what makes a good team, and they say, "Oh, well, we get on really well," and that's great too. Don't get me wrong, harmony is really important, but there needs to be a sense of tension if you're trying to win. And good teams try to win. They try to get more market share. They try to grow. They try to whatever parameters you're using. There is some conflict and tension endemic in that, and to get better performance and to push people nicely and ensure that everyone moves in the same direction. So it's interesting that I think we can sometimes overstate the importance of harmony and not be really alive to the reality that there's necessarily conflict and tension. And you're quite right about the friends thing. Took me a bit. I was a bit older than you, actually, Rich, before I came to that realization. But because it is a very different. And I guess in a startup world, you can sometimes you make those mistakes a bit more in a more polished environment as things got bigger, and the firm got bigger. It was a lot easier to avoid those as well, I think, as a mistake.
Absolutely. And so, you mentioned earlier in the conversation, you're now very much sort of in this space of conflict, negotiation, mediation, etc. So, what was it about conflict that, drew you to wanting to specialize in that space?
I think what really drew me was, again, a really acute interest in the human condition. What makes people have different perspectives, and why do people have different perspectives? And even though they do, is there a process that makes this more manageable, and can people work a way through this? So I think what's really interested me about conflict is it's just innate to the human condition. And I've always been fascinated in what makes people tick and what motivates people and what's important to people, because we have this assumption, that old quote, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. So we often have this sort of view that people have our priorities and perspectives and preferences, and they often don't, of course. So, yeah, it was probably through the lens of leadership and law together coalescing that got me in the conflict space.
And so if you were to summarize your, key thoughts about, what makes people tick and what are the things to be mindful of in terms of ensuring that you can operate effectively in a conflicted situation, what would you say?
I think the most important thing is to really take the time required to understand perspectives. A lot of the work that I do in workplace conflict is staying in a stage of empathy, even if you don't agree, just getting a real good sense of where people are coming from, because it's only from there that you can find a path forward. And very often, a lot of the tension that you have in workplaces because there's just not enough work done on understanding various perspectives and priorities and mapping that out and getting people to properly understand it. And it's only then that once you do that, and sometimes that can take a while actually, and that can be quite clumsy, and particularly in modern workplaces, because we can hide behind, grievances and processes. And don't get me wrong, they're really important at times. But a lot of stuff that is wrapped up in grievances and processes that are formal are really just interpersonal issues in many ways that are being avoided. So I think the big takeaway when it comes to workplace conflict in particular is taking the time to understand various perspectives. Don't get lost in it, because you still need to map a way forward. But the way forward stems from that really acute understanding of various perspectives. So that's my view. So I really I think that most of the skills that I bring to bear in coaching work with conflict is just about getting people to be better, if you like, at listening and understanding what are the drivers for people.
Yeah. And so are you using a particular framework for that people can utilize to ensure that they are considering all of the various elements of what you've just discussed?
Yeah, I do. I mean, the framework I use is largely based on a coaching framework of in my one. There's two pieces of my work here that I need to address. The one-on-one work, which is coaching, is really to be contrasted with mentoring or consulting, because you're really teasing out what their goals are and what their imperatives are and what success looks like for them. So it's very much about asking the right broad questions in my one-on-one work to tease out what good looks like for them and where they want to be and why, and what's the price that you pay necessarily if you're stagnate or you're not getting where you need to be. So the coaching model, if you like, is very much about, can be contrasted with consulting, can be contrasted with mentoring, which is more, it's a bit messy sometimes. You do find yourself stepping a bit into the advice. People, particularly younger people, might turn to you and you might, but I'm really alive to that distinction. I'm really, in my coaching work, I'm really alive to the importance of ensuring that it's really self-directed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the model that I use there. In my conflict work in workplaces, that's different, because that's about getting people together in the room and having the conversations and really working hard to understand what the conflict stems from, what the misunderstanding may stem from, what the difficulties may stem from, and then trying to get people accountable to a path forward that makes it work, assuming there's a commitment organisationally for that to happen. I mean, sometimes, other choices are made, which is fine. People leave, etc., and that's fine as well. But certainly, if it comes to teamwork and repair and facilitation, that's about getting people as much. You do some one-on-one coaching work, but it's very much about getting people in the room together.
Right. And so that works predominantly then working internally within a business rather than conflict between, say, an organization and its customer or its supplier.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by that. I haven't been called upon to do that work, but I know that it's really important work, actually. And I think that it's probably not done well enough. I know, for example, I always say to lawyers that if, for example, you might expect a level of conflict with inverted commas the other side in a litigation, but if you feel your client's not on board or a key stakeholder is not on board, it's actually far more stressful. We find that really stressful. So I do some broad work in that space in terms of helping people understand what good partnerships look like and what are the ingredients of a good partnership. But I haven't been called upon to do any work between if I can call it, customers and providers at this stage.
Right. Okay. And so talk us through, obviously without breaching any confidentiality, talk us through an example of a type of engagement you might have. What led to you being engaged and how you worked with that organisation and the sort of outcomes you were able to assist them in achieving.
Yeah, sure. Well, one comes to mind is a senior people in a not-for-profit that had significant interpersonal issues that had, weren't including each other in conversations, were working around each other, the sort of conflict you often see. And it was a whole day process understanding. And at the end of the day, they shared a glass of wine together. And and I always say to people in that space, you don't have to be friends, and you're probably never going to be friends because often I'm called in when it's fairly late in the day when things are quite entrenched. But it's more about working out and making people accountable. So the agreements, say in the workplace space that I come up with, are really quite specific, Richard. You'd be surprised. It's about, how do we communicate, and you break it down into, how do we communicate about processes in a really practical way? Because what you want is to have a level of accountability between people, and people left with it, leave the mediation room, if you like, with a clear framework for how to work better together. So that's an example of that type of work. And then the other work that I do is just more traditional, if I can call it, litigation mediation. So, claims made for injury or other things. So I'm, if you like, a shuttle diplomat at times between the plaintiff, the person who's bringing the claim, and insurance companies, and just trying to have conversations with them both and trying to see if there's a settlement path within the context of that litigation. So that's kind of, broadly speaking, the work that I do.
Right. It's interesting. I've recruited a lot in the not-for-profit space, and from the outside you would assume not-for-profits, everybody's there because they want to do great work, and it's all rainbows and unicorns, and the culture is beautiful and so cooperative and well intended. But in fact, my experience has been that not-for-profits often have the most conflict and the most dysfunctional cultures because the people are there, they've got a very strong heart connection to the work that they do, and it can lead to a lot of challenges in terms of getting cooperative outcomes.
You are really, that's an astute point. I've noticed the same. They can become more political, if you like, in a sense, not-for-profit organisations and workplaces. And as much as the important work they do, I guess, there's an honesty, inverted commas, in financial metrics that sometimes make sort of a level of transparency a bit easier in certain workplaces, who's producing what and why, and where the revenue is. Whereas you're right, in not-for-profits, there's a significant degree of passion and different perspectives, and I've seen that firsthand as well. But also I've seen, on the flip side, some great workplace cultures in that space as well, because it does attract some really good people, obviously.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Another challenge that a lot of not-for-profits have is that, particularly the CEO working with the board, the board can often be made up of people who have got, great intentions, and they have, for example, my child has got a disability, so therefore I want to be on the board of that disability not-for-profit because I want to support the great work that they're doing, and yet often those directors they're not appropriately qualified. They don't have the strategic and professional experience, and can really infringe on the CEO's ability to do their job properly. And I have those conversations almost on a weekly basis where, CEOs are pulling their hair out. So I imagine, Damien, for you, there's lots of opportunity to, avail themselves of your services.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, no, you're quite right about that. And the people that are attracted to the boards, and often it's not a paid position. So, and they're so personally invested in that space. And the understandings that good boards have of being in the strategic as opposed to the operational space, and how blurry that can become.
Yeah,
you're quite right.
Sure. And so tell us more about your sort of coaching engagements then, because it sounds like the mediation conflict, work that you do is, short-lived, go in, run a workshop, get people on the same page, whereas a coaching relationship typically would extend much longer than that.
Yeah.
So, tell us more about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's usually 6 months to 12 months, depending on. So there's a couple of ways it happens. First of all, sometimes it happens at the request of. Actually, some organisations are far better now at saying you get to a certain level and you get a level of coaching.
Right.
And that's becoming slightly more common. Not so common in the Brisbane market, but a bit more common in the Sydney and Melbourne markets. So my, if you like, target client that I work with in coaching tends to be in professional services, because it's just my sweet spot, of course. It's where I've been, and it's where there's sort of a level of credibility. And so you're right. It's about them setting. It may be directed by HR. It may be. Sometimes it is. Also, there's been some interpersonal issues that they need to look at. That happens. I've had that, but often it might well be either paid by HR because you've reached a certain stage in your career, and to go to the next level, we like to provide this additional service, or it may well be self-directed. People come to you and say, listen, I am challenged, I'm stagnating. I think I'm stuck. I think I'm not doing what I need to do. Perhaps even it might be, is this role even right for me? You might even start to have those conversations. So it's, as I said, it's very self-directed, and the time frame is very much about the person in terms of what their goals and imperatives are. But generally speaking, it's not particularly effective unless it's sort of 6 months beyond, because there's so much. You need to build rapport, and you need to really get to understand their world, and that doesn't happen overnight. So I think it should be seen as a mid to longer term investment, coaching, for it to be really effective.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. You look at, say, somebody who's a champion tennis player, and they'll have a skills coach, and they'll have a dietitian, and they'll have a psychologist, and they'll have a whole range of people there supporting them to perform at their best. And yet within the business context, it's often perceived as, if I've got a coach, that means there's something wrong with me. In fact, I've had people on this podcast that I have assisted them in getting a coach, because I've always used coaches. In fact, at the moment, I'm working with 3 different coaches. But, and I'll say to them in this podcast, so, have you utilized coaching in terms of helping you to achieve the success in your career? It's, no, I've never used a coach. It's almost, an admission of weakness, which I think's quite ridiculous. And the other thing also is that, if an organization says to somebody, look, we think you've got great potential and we want to support you by providing you with a coach, the employer would go, oh, that's fantastic. I'd love to have a coach. And yet it's certainly from an Australian context, people rarely will spend money on a coach themselves unless they're an owner like me.
Yeah.
I even though it might assist you in accelerating your career or increasing your remuneration or getting clear about your sort of trajectory and so on, people say, oh, no, I'd rather spend that money on a new TV. Bizarre.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, isn't it? Is it perhaps an admission that they need help? Everyone needs help for obvious reasons. I've sought out help in my life, but it's true. I think it's coming a little bit better and more accepted. I think, and the sporting analogy people are starting to realise works. They see the fact that you even look at the Lions on the weekend. There might have been Chris Fagan, but there was lots of people in that coaching. It's a teamwork approach to coaching, isn't it, at that level? So I think it is changing over time. I think professional services are slower to change than other because they're very much the people that we know how it's done here. We solve the problems. But you're quite right, Richard. It's certainly something that I think is really important to seek out because just the reality of, I think, two things first. First of all, just another perspective because we're all in our own heads and thoughts a lot. And the second thing is perspective plus accountability, just holding people to account at times around, you've probably seen the power in your business. Have you done that? That's important. Why? And, and making sure people are accountable is actually, even if you just do that well enough, those two things, perspective and accountability, you will significantly improve someone's life, one would have thought.
Oh, for sure. In fact, one of the coaches that I work with is an accountability coach. And so every week I meet with him and, it's okay, these are the things that you said you were going to do last week and how'd you go? And what are your plans and what measures do you want put in place to keep you accountable for next week and for particular projects and so on? Because I know that if I didn't have that, then, like most of us, we tend to do what's urgent rather than what's important. And you get to the end of a week and with the best of intention, go, shit, I didn't get any of those things done that I wanted to because I've been too busy up to my neck in crocodiles.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And the whole, quote Steve Jobs, the difference between the signal and the noise. A lot of us get caught in the noise, don't we, of the day-to-day, but the signal is, where we want to be and why, and the broader picture and the strategic picture and our positioning or whatever it is. And or, the other analogy is working in the business as opposed to working on the business, those sort of things come to mind. But it's again, it's very common, and I've fallen into the same trap myself, mate. At the end of the week, I've just looked back and I've gone, geez, I think I just answered a lot of inquiries. I didn't really move the caravan where I needed it.
So I do as I say, not as I do.
That's right.
And so, Damien, how would somebody engage with you if they, listen to this podcast and they think, I'd like to see how Damien can support either conflict, resolving some conflict in my business or, coaching me to be more successful?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So I've got a website, EvolveResolve.com. It's got a Calendly function there, so you can book me for a discovery call or a chemistry call in the coaching space, we like to call it. And then you can book me for a mediation, either a half day or a full day. And so it's all automated and I just have to be diligent and make sure that when I'm in Italy, of course, those days are blocked out, which they were recently. So it's a great system where, you can just use the website to make the booking. I keep the time free for those types of processes, and then I block out time. So it works quite well. And you can also check out on my website various resources, articles, newsletters and podcasts as well, if it's of interest. Similar to you, Richard, in my podcasting space, I just talk to a lot of people that I'm really interested in, because I just find there's value in the conversation. So people in sport, conflict, mediation, leadership, it's broad compass, but that's sort of the areas that I cover off on the podcast.
Fantastic. Well, we'll make sure we include links to all of those. And before we wrap it up, Damien, is there anything, that I haven't asked you or that you are wanting to talk about today that you want to raise?
No, not particularly. I really appreciate the opportunity, Richard. I thought it was a great conversation, and appreciate the time to have a chat to you. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, all the best with your business, and I look forward to staying in touch and hearing your success stories.
No worries, Richard. All the best. Take care.
Right, have a great afternoon.
See ya. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Arete Podcast with Richard Triggs. We frequently feature guests from organisations we are currently recruiting to build the company brand as an attraction strategy for candidates. If you would like to promote your organisation's brand as an employer of choice, please contact Richard directly on 0403 588 517 or via email richardt@areteexecutive.com.au.